Now they'll never forget what you did for this country. Never.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and these are all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in every single episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And I am so excited to show you guys these brand new Cap parody merch designs that we have at our merch store. There's the America's Ass commemorative stamp, the Ross 24 shirt, and the 8-bit RPG where Cap is presented with the choice: ask if anyone wants to get out or hail Hydra. These are available as t-shirts or hoodies for cold weather, and we love designing all of our Marvel parody shirts for you guys, and you can find these and other designs on our merch shelf below. Also, if you want to become a member so you don't miss out on any new merch announcements, the link for that is below as well.
The series opens with Sam Wilson remembering his final conversation with Steve from Endgame while ironing his shirt. Now, there is a lot of this kind of thing in this episode, contrasting the heroes' extraordinary lives with their ordinary lives. The pennant in the background is from LSU, a nod to Sam's new home state of Louisiana, because he was from Harlem in the comics. He also transports the shield in the same case that Steve carried it in, showing he hasn't really used this baby on any missions. It's still mint in the wrapper. We pick up with Sam on a mission to stop the LAF, led by Batroc the Leaper. He's a longtime Captain America villain who was hired by Nick Fury to hijack the Lemurian Star back in the Winter Soldier. It was great seeing Red Wing in action again. I especially love that they added these little chirps for him, like a droid. In the comics, Red Wing is an actual Falcon that Sam has a telepathic relationship with. I always thought the MCU was missing out on a key part of Sam's character by not giving him this animal companion. The guy helping him on the ground is Joaquin Torres. In the comics, Torres becomes the Falcon after Sam becomes Captain America. Sam uses the head scissor to take down Batroc, a move he probably learned from Black Widow. And later, we see that Torres also learned a move from Black Widow. This opening sequence of Sam fighting the LAF flying squirrels was incredible. Absolutely stunning. This was the best superhero flying sequence I've seen since Iron Man 3, maybe since Superman 78. It made me really bummed out that I wasn't seeing this in theater. This looks like a combination of CGI, drone footage, and actual skydivers, and it's breathtaking. Everything has weight, and the way the CG Falcon gets lost out of frame makes it seem realistic and kinetic. The flying squirrels he's up against are dressed in green jumpsuits with yellow stripes, the uniform worn by Hydra henchmen in the comics. Sam's suit looks different now, trading the black and red for red and white, much closer to his uniform in the comics. Torres finds an augmented reality icon used by the Flag Smashers. Now, augmented reality is an actual tool used by modern-day activists to organize or expose corporate misdeeds. The leader of the Flag Smashers is Karli Morgenthau, a gender-swapped version of Karl Morgenthau from the comics, where he's a villain called Flag Smasher. Basically, his dad was an ambassador, killed in front of a Latvian embassy, so then he goes on to dedicate his life to erasing all nations from the earth. In fact, in his very first scene, he's literally smashing flags in front of the UN. This show has made the Flag Smashers into a worldwide organization who takes the song Imagine a little too literally. Imagine there's no country. Torres spouts a conspiracy theory that Captain America is on a secret base on the moon. Now, this reminded me of Luther from Umbrella Academy, the Captain America-like hero who lived on the moon for years. But also, there is a secret moon base in the comics that's the home of Uatu, the Watcher. Jeffrey Wright is voicing him in the What If series. So, I mean, Steve could be on the moon. No one's saying that he's not. In the comics, Nick Fury also lived on this base when he became the Watcher. In the Smithsonian, Sam is donating the shield to the Cap exhibit that we first saw in The Winter Soldier, where he's joined by James Rhodes. There are lots of Easter eggs in this exhibit. This is Cap's uniform from the first Avengers movie. This uniform is from the Howling Commando named Pinkerton, who was a marksman. The Bucky section has been expanded to include his time as the Winter Soldier and the Sokovia Accords. In fact, this glass in the foreground even bears the emblem of the Sokovian flag. This newspaper headline celebrates the Howling Commandos destroying Hydra factories, like we saw in First Avenger, and these are all weapons that we see the Howling Commandos using here. I never noticed this before, but Sebastian Stan is making duck lips in this scene. And there's also Cap's bike and original shield from First Avenger. This display shows Thanos' ship from Infinity War with the text "out of hiding," meaning that this is the event that drew Steve Rogers into the public eye again. The names of the people who were blipped are called the Vanished, just like they were at the San Francisco Memorial that we saw in Endgame. Now, this plaque that reads "Final Mission" is the most interesting. The text here reads, "With the death of Tony Stark, Steve Rogers honored his friend by laying down his shield and living the lives he fought so hard to protect." This doesn't mention that the Avengers use time travel, so that's probably not common knowledge. But it also doesn't say that Steve died. But the montage at the beginning of Far From Home heavily implies that the world thinks Cap is dead. I mean, otherwise he would have been at the Smithsonian dedication, right?
Right.
But then that gets into the whole thing where the Russo brothers say that Steve lived his life out in another reality, but Endgame's writers say that he was Peggy's husband secretly in the MCU all along. This newspaper is when Steve liberated the Hydra camp on his first mission. This poster says his USO tour was canceled, and we actually see the same poster in First Avenger here. This is Captain America issue 1 from real life, and also like we see in First Avenger. But you'll notice that his teen sidekick Bucky is missing from the movie version because Cap never had a teen sidekick in the MCU. This poster calls back to Cap's time as a war bond salesman. Here's his 4F form, the photo of him that Peggy had framed on her desk, him holding the car door after chasing the Hydra agent, and this is a photo of him coming out of the super soldier capsule. In this scene, Sam explains why he didn't accept the title of Captain America.
Feels like it belongs to someone else. And someone else is Steve.
I love the framing here with the glass separating him from the shield. It's showing that he's placing this legacy on a pedestal, something he can see but never touch. Oh, and we can see here that Cap's World War II uniform was returned, meaning that this guy might have gotten his job back.
I am so fired.
Next we check in with the Winter Soldier, and I love how they brought back his theme in this sequence. He wakes up and we see that he's still living like an assassin.
I'm home, lying in my bed, and it's like...
lying on a marshmallow. I feel like I'm gonna sink right to the floor.
Now, just like we see glimpses of Sam's mundane life, we also check in with Bucky's therapy session. But I don't mind all of these quiet sequences.
And then we can renovate the kitchen.
Ordinary life sequences like these are some of the best scenes in the movies. Now in this scene, notice how Bucky is sitting in front of a vibrant forest. But he's set apart from this location. He's lit darker to show that this life is out of reach. He's also placed at the bottom of the frame to show that he feels diminutive in this setting. Even the blinds in the room look like prison bars to show that he's a prisoner of his own guilt.
You're alone.
He's also filmed with extreme close-ups on one side of his face to show that he's not revealing his full self. He's still, in many ways, only half a man, grappling with the sins that his other half has committed. He talks about making amends with Senator Atwood, who, like Senator Stern, was a Hydra pawn buried in the government. So internally, Bucky is cleaning Hydra out of his head, and literally, he's clearing them out from the government. He also name drops Wakanda.
I had a little calm in Wakanda.
You'll remember that, like Dave Chappelle, he went to Africa to clear his head.
Where does it fight?
So I went through all the names on Bucky's list, and guess what? There's a few Easter eggs here. Andrei Rostov in the comics is the Soviet villain, the Red Guardian. In the more recent comics, he was Bucky's warden when the Russians imprisoned him in a gulag. Now this is during the period when Bucky was making amends in the comics like he's doing now in the MCU. P.W. Hauser was the actor who starred alongside Sebastian Stan in I, Tonya. Great movie. H. Zemo is Helmut Zemo, the longtime Captain America villain who we saw in Civil War and is returning in this series. Hendrickson could be a reference to Hal Hendrickson, the soldier in the comics who received the Venom symbiote before Flash Thompson. It's a long story. There are two names called Kaminsky, which could be a reference to this Kaminsky who worked with Hydra agent John Garrett in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And Kutsunov was a Soviet scientist who invented a robot called Udarnik. Now this list actually parallels Steve's list from Winter Soldier. Both he and Bucky were listing ways to re-enter society, but Steve was trying to catch up on the present, while Bucky is trying to make amends for his past. And I love that the show is dealing with real veterans issues, like financial problems, PTSD, and this struggle to rejoin society. These were some of the most heartfelt moments in Winter Soldier that grounded the movie and helped Steve and Sam form a bond.
Some stuff you leave there, other stuff you bring back.
He tells his friend,
I can't believe you did that. It's a dance to these things. You gotta warm up.
now dancing carries a lot of symbolic meaning for Cap and Bucky, because after all, if you wanted to have a good time in the 40s, there was literally nothing else to do. Steve talked about never going dancing.
Women aren't exactly lining up to dance with a guy they might step on.
He and Bucky were going to take their dates dancing when Steve enlisted.
Come on, you're kind of missing the point of a double date. We're taking the girls dancing.
Bucky asked Peggy to dance.
I might, even when this is all over, go dancing.
Then what are we waiting for?
The right partner.
And of course, Steve ended his story by finally getting his dance with Peggy. And how about the reveal that Bucky killed this guy's son? That is absolutely brutal. Back on the bayou, Sam returns home to his family's shrimping boat business.
On a good day, you can catch over 100 pounds of shrimp.
I'm sorry about that. Sam's sister is named Sarah, just like in the comics, and their parents were Paul and Darlene, also like in the comics. This whole subplot about him wanting to keep the boat in his business might seem trivial, but it actually has symbolic meaning. Sam is holding on to the past and old traditions he doesn't want to change. In the same way, he's unable to imagine a world with a different Captain America than Steve Rogers.
This thing's gotta go.
We grew up on this thing.
When Bucky goes on his date, it's filmed through hazy glass. Just like Sam looking at the shield, this shows that Bucky is separated from this world. By socializing, he's moved into a new phase of his life where the future is unclear. But even when he's just hanging out with a nice woman on a date, he still finds himself drawn into a war game. Battleship.
You have sunk my battleship.
Also, this instruction manual says electronic battleship, but this is clearly not electronic battleship, just saying. And she also says,
"So have you dated much since half the fish in the sea came back?"
A joke about dating, literal fish since they're in a sushi restaurant, and also since they're playing a board game on a pretend sea. Like ogres, this show has layers.
You get it! We both have layers.
Bucky tries to settle the waving cat, another small metaphor that he's trying to quiet the restlessness inside himself. Oh, and this line,
"You know how we call a guy whose wife died a widower?"
is stolen from 6 Feet Under.
If you lose a spouse, you're called a widow or a widower. If you're a child and
Your parents die, you're an orphan.
But what's the word to describe a parent who loses a child?
Because it's like the worst thing that can happen.
I guess that's just too f***ing awful to even have a name.
Now, over in Switzerland, Torres is infiltrating the Flag Smashers, and oh my god, look there, that's a hexagon. Just like the hexagons in WandaVision, and space travel, and the bee guy, and the bees!
Not the bees!
Sorry everyone, look, I spent 8 weeks spotting hexagons everywhere. Even Doug helped me out. I feel like Bucky, I have to purge all that out of my mind. Moving on, you'll notice that the Flag Smashers appear to be super strong. Now, there's an explanation for that from the comics that could link the new Captain America to this evil group, but I'll get into that when we talk about the new Cap. The lone officer asks a question I've wondered about for a while.
How do you guys make a living?
And he even name drops Tony Stark.
Is there some kind of fun for heroes, or did Stark pay you when he was around?
Since in the comics, Stark did bankroll the Avengers. Shout out to the production design team for subtly surrounding Sam's family home with touches that reinforce who he is. There's the child's drawing of a jet, reflecting his time in the Air Force, the eagle inside the snow globe because he's the Falcon, and this ichthus fish, perhaps implying that he comes from a religious home. When Torres shows Sam the footage, he says,
"Wait, you don't think he could be a..."
But I'll circle back to you.
Now, I wonder who he's talking about. My guess is either Zemo, some unknown villain, or maybe Bucky. It could be that Sam still distrusts Bucky and think he's going to snap and become the Winter Soldier. Remember that in Winter Soldier he said,
I don't think he's the kind you save. He's the kind you stop.
The episode ends with them watching WHIH. This is the news network inside the MCU that also created the in-universe social videos during Phase 2 and 3.
Tony Stark's got enough money to fix New York 10 times over.
And then the government introduces their brand new Captain America, John Walker. So much to unpack here. First, a very brief history from the comics. Back in the 80s, the government insisted that Captain America follow their orders, and so Steve walked away from the Shield. The government then chose this ultra-conservative guy named John Walker to be the new Cap. It didn't go so well. He went nuts and started killing guys until Steve took over again. But Walker had super strength that he got from a villain called the Power Broker. He was kind of like Viagra, charging people for male enhancement. Now you'll notice that Walker's uniform looks very different from Captain America's. It's actually based on the uniform that Steve wore while he wasn't Captain America, and that John Walker would later use as the hero US agent. Now bringing John Walker into the story is a huge opportunity to make a political commentary on the dichotomy of two Americas and the red state blue state divide. Some of you might be wondering, why didn't they ask Sam to be the new Cap if he was Steve's choice? And then why lie to him? Well, first of all, they wanted someone they could control, and Sam had already defied the Sokovia Accords. Plus, he had already turned down the Shield. But I also think that race was a factor. When Walker is chosen in the comics, one of the characters just flat out says that America wasn't ready for a black Captain America. There's a terrific comic series called Truth, Red, White, and Black. It's about Isiah Bradley, the black GI who the Army experimented on during World War II, who became the black Captain America, briefly.
So let's go through these end credits, which are loaded with Easter eggs.
We see Cap's shield inside a bomb, showing that the title of Captain America can be used to incite terrorism and violence, like the Flag Smashers. I love that there's all this fine print text, like its history slowly being unredacted in front of our eyes. Forces from neighboring Madripoor, this is the fictional Asian country that we've seen in the trailers. There's also a mention of Agent 13, that's Sharon Carter, who's going to appear in a later episode. and a masked man causing chaos in Prague, where they filmed much of this show. December 16, 1991 is the date Winter Soldier killed Stark's parents. 5 Years Lost and Found refers to the snap and the blip. Where Do We Go Now That They're Gone is the poster of the support group that Steve was hosting in Endgame.
The world is in our hands.
Now this language is actually Russian, but I ran it through Google Translate and it turns out this is actually a reference to your mom. And finally, these are the words used to activate the Winter Soldier in Civil War.
17. Рассвет.
Episode 2 begins with John Walker at his old high school locker room.
His hometown is the same as it is in the comics, Custer's Grove, Georgia. This was named after General George Armstrong Custer, the headstrong cavalry captain that led his people to being massacred at Little Bighorn. In the comics, John Walker has similar bravado, eventually becomes unhinged and creates a disaster, just like Custer. Custer's Grove is especially notable in the comics because it's where John's parents were murdered. This sends John off on a killing spree that leads to the government taking away the Captain America title. Walker's sidekick is Lamar Hoskins, who, in the comic, begins as Walker's sidekick Battlestar. But after Walker becomes Cap, he wore the uniform of Bucky. There's a hint of that here because you see him wearing the blue tactical suit beneath his armor, and that's Bucky's collar in the MCU. I think it's interesting that as soon as the government gets control of Captain America, the first thing they do is turn him into a propaganda tool. Again, the marching band even plays a rearrangement of the Star-Spangled Man with a Plan from First Avengers. And of course, there are products, toys, very reminiscent of American propaganda during the Gulf War, where kids could play out the war at home with video games, toys, and trading cards. Heck, I still have my set of Operation Enduring Freedom trading cards. Now this is all great because it shows the MCU government doing everything the real military does in real life, just blown up on a wider, more visible scale. And alright, look, okay. Disney owns Marvel, Disney owns ABC, and Disney owns...
Good morning, America!
We get it. Corporate synergy. Now this line also has a subtle double meaning. In the comics, John Walker is an ultra right-wing conservative. Now when Ronald Reagan ran for re-election in 1984, his motto was,
"It's morning again in America."
Now I don't know if a Disney Plus show is going to dive into politics and talk about Walker's political beliefs, but they are trying to subtly tie him into a certain image of America. The Norman Rockwell, Red State, aw shucks, apple pie, morning in America kind of hero. It's signaling to the American people, hey, we know things have been weird, the world's been upset, but don't worry. We are returning to normalcy, the old America that you used to know. This is your Captain America. When Bucky watches the John Walker announcement, we see that he's sleeping on the floor, revisiting this conversation from Winter Soldier.
When I was over there, I sleep on the ground, use rock for pillows like a caveman. Now I'm home, lying in my bed, and it's like...
lying on a marshmallow.
During his interview, Walker name drops Bruce Banner and Tony Stark, and we see him training with the shield. Now this was actually a big part of his arc in the comics. It took him a long time to master the shield, and he actually had to learn from one of Cap's villains, the Taskmaster. In the books, John Walker has super strength that was given to him by the Power Broker, the same villain that's chasing down the Flag Smashers. Sam mentions the big three.
The big three.
What big three?
Androids, aliens, and wizards.
Referencing, well, I guess every big threat so far.
How do you know about Gandalf?
I read The Hobbit in 1937 when it first came out.
Now, Bucky says he read The Hobbit in 1937, but here's the thing. That book was released in Europe in 1937 and America in 1938. So, James Buchanan Barnes must have been such a huge fantasy fanatic that he tracked down this hot fantasy book that he read about in the zines. And before you say that he got the years mixed up, remember, Bucky don't forget.
I remember all of it.
Someone should really tell him there's been a massive Hobbit sequel release since he was a pawn of Hydra.
Stupid fat Hobbit!
He could really use a pop culture catch-up book like the one Steve had. Now, this kind of pop culture discourse serves a few purposes. One, it endears these characters to the fans, because hey, they're talking about pop culture just like us.
She could have taken out Thanos on her own if he hadn't initiated a blitz.
But it also explains concepts to us, like time travel in Endgame.
Star Trek, Terminator, Time Cop, Time After Time,
Quantum Leap,
Wrinkle in Time, Somewhere in Time,
Hot Tub Time Machine,
Hot Tub Time Machine,
or the sitcom reality in WandaVision. Here it's telling us that regular people, disconnected from the adventures and skybeams, really have no idea what's actually happening. All they know is that their lives are being controlled by larger forces like robots, aliens, and wizards. So the regular people will do anything to feel like they have control, like joining a terrorist group, or by getting behind a new symbol like Captain America. When they're flying to Germany, a country with some rough memories for Bucky and Sam, they argue in the plane about having a plan.
So no plan.
This echoes a similar conversation that Tony and Steve had in The Avengers.
We need a plan of attack.
I have a plan. Attack.
Bucky reminds Sam of his new nickname.
It's actually White Wolf.
In the comics, White Wolf is the name of the head of Wakandan secret police, but in the MCU, it's what the school children called Bucky. And it's what this guy calls himself. They have tracked down the Flag Smashers led by Karli Morgenthau. I'm guessing that they're stealing this serum to make as many people superpowered as possible, like Syndrome in The Incredibles.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
Now this is going to put her goals at odds with Baron Zemo, who wants to end all enhanced individuals. So, Sam and Bucky will temporarily be forced to work alongside Zemo, until...
I'd take a deal and then crawfish and drill that old devil in the ass.
And oh god, how awful was the sound when she broke Red Wing. I like how the show is giving us parallels between Steve and John Walker. For instance, they're both anxious before their public debuts, but something is just a little bit off about this guy. Wizard69 on Twitter pointed out that one of the Flag Smashers trucks has a license plate MK-A5012. In the comics, the Steve Rogers of Earth 5012 is dead, just like we are led to believe in this show. And later on, he also caught that Zemo's cell number is 2187. Victoria Tano on Twitter pointed out that 2187 was the name of Princess Leia's cell in Star Wars A New Hope.
2187, you go and get her.
Both good catches, thanks for that.
We're all fine here now, thank you. How are you?
John Walker drops into the high-speed chase and he's using a pistol. Now, of course, Steve did use guns in the war, but this is more similar to when Bucky became Cap in the comics. It's a neat visual way of showing that this Captain America is different. They ask him,
You ever jump on top of a grenade?
a callback to Skinny Steve in First Avenger.
Get away! Get back!
On the way home, Sam reminds Bucky about the events of Civil War.
Sharon was branded enemy of the state, and Steve and I were on the run for 2 years.
Now, Bucky didn't have to go through those 2 years because he was in Wakanda, although he has spent a lot of time on the run as a fugitive. I know a lot of you are going to ask me about these flyers, so we did some Google translating. This one says, we buy old cars, we get rid of pests, and have auto problems? Call Hank now. And this one is a tongue-in-cheek reference to your favorite DC hero. This is your mom. Karli is being chased by the Power Broker. My guess is they didn't steal vaccines, they stole super soldier serum. In the comics, the Power Broker is a businessman who's like the Viagra of the superhero world. He gives people male enhancement for a price. The show seems to be saying that he's been at this since the 1950s.
He was a hero. One of the ones that Hydra feared the most, like Steve. We met in 51.
If by met you mean I whooped your ass.
So let's talk about Isiah Bradley. In the comics, he was part of a World War II top-secret government program that tried to replicate the super soldier serum on black soldiers against their will. Now this again is taken from real life, where the Pentagon used black soldiers as guinea pigs in World War II, and that's just the stuff they admit to. This was all part of the brilliant series The Truth, Red, White, and Black, which showed Bradley donning the uniform of Captain America to shut down a Nazi human experiment lab. In the comics, Bradley was imprisoned for stealing Cap's uniform, just like he was imprisoned in the MCU.
They put my ass in jail for 30 years.
Now, just like in the show, he lives a quiet life, withdrawn from the spotlight. But in the comics, he's famous in the black community for his achievements. Now, there are a few key differences here. We already knew the government was trying to replicate the super soldier serum. That's the origin of the Abomination and the Hulk.
So this Dr. Banner was trying to replicate the serum they used on me?
A lot of people were.
In the comics, there actually was a replacement Cap in the 1950s. William Burnside, a Steve Rogers fanboy who would go on to lose his mind to become a villain. Isaiah's experiments will come full circle when Sam takes the shield and is fully recognized as Captain America. And by the way, the kid who answers the door is Isaiah's grandson, Eli, who, in the comics, is the superhero Patriot, leader of the Young Avengers. Now, we made a whole video about this, but Wanda's kids from WandaVision, Cassie Lang from Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Kate Bishop from the Hawkeye series are all members of this team. And also, just like in the comics, Steve didn't know about Isiah Bradley. I also like that Isiah lives in Baltimore and not in Harlem like every other black character in Marvel Comics.
It's Baltimore, gentlemen. The gods will not save you.
The racial profiling scene was all too real and foreshadowed by this conversation.
My daddy told me it's Black Falcon.
Is it because I'm black and I'm the Falcon?
Well, technically, yes.
Because, unfortunately, people see race before they see the hero. This series is about Sam overcoming that perception. So he won't be the black Captain America, he'll be Captain America. The episode ends with Mozart's Requiem playing as we are reintroduced to one of Cap's all-time greatest villains from the comics, Zemo. Get hyped.
Death means nothing to me. I have evolved my body over the years.
Episode 3 opens with a stock footage compilation ad for the Global Recreation Council, which was explained to us in the last episode.
Well, the GRC, they're doing the best they can to get things up and running smoothly post-blip.
So we've got a front-facing, shadowy organization that's controlling the world's resources and shuttling John Walker around the world. Definitely going to end up being evil. Walker and Battlestar burst into the Flag Smashers hideout from last episode, and this is where Walker starts to really show his true colors.
Do you know who I am?
Now this is the exact opposite of Steve Rogers. Steve always felt like the uniform is something that he had to live up to. John Walker sees the uniform as something that gives him power over others. And also, he's got a potty mouth.
Bullshit.
Language.
And by the way, Battlestar's outfit actually has a star on the front, similar to his costume from the comics. Then this guy says, now this is actually the key line of the episode, and it explains John Walker. It's the difference between operating within the law and thinking that you are the law. The difference between democracy and fascism. As soon as the powerful start thinking they're better than the disenfranchised, they do things like keep art for themselves, hoard supplies at the GRC, or create super soldier serum for their own private armies that serve themselves and not the people. Later, Sam, Bucky, and Zemo talk about the power of symbols. Zemo doesn't like heroes because symbols are dangerous when people place too much faith in them.
Do we want to live in a world full of people like the Red Skull?
And remember, when he met Captain America, he said,
There's a bit of green in the blue of your eyes. How nice to find a flaw.
So Zemo talks about Steve's flaws like they're a liability.
Become symbols, icons, and then we start to forget about their flaws.
And this seems to have sunk into Sam, because later he talks about destroying the shield so no one can usurp the symbol for evil.
Maybe I made a mistake.
You did?
Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't have put it in a museum. Maybe I should have destroyed it.
This is because he sees Steve as perfect, a Captain America that no one else could live up to. But what neither he nor Zemo understand is that Steve Rogers was a great Captain America because of his flaws. He never believed the symbol was perfect or that he was perfect just because he was chosen to use the shield. Steve had a simple philosophy.
I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from.
And he would spend his whole life fighting to prove that he was worthy of the symbol that he carried. When the action moves to Zemo's cell, his theme from Civil War plays. Then he tries out the Hydra code words from Civil War. Now this whole scene was obviously influenced by Silence of the Lambs, but not just because there's a hero and a villain looking at each other through glass. Clarice asked for Lecter's help capturing another criminal, and this led to him escaping.
If you like pina coladas.
Which is what happens in this episode. Zemo is reading Machiavelli's The Prince, a famous book that teaches the rules of manipulating events to gain power. Not the kind of book I would let this guy read in prison. Green eggs and ham, maybe The Hobbit. Sam helpfully recounts the events of Civil War.
He blew up the UN. He killed King T'Chaka and framed you for it. Did you forget that?
So, I mentioned Lord of the Rings earlier. In both stories, a guy named Sam is on a quest with another character who possesses an evil power, in this case the super soldier serum. The two of them travel long distances to destroy this power. Along the way, they make an alliance with a villain and meet a hooded stranger in a bar who turns out to be their savior. Could be a coincidence, or maybe this story is going to end with a ghost army fighting an army of super soldier serum orcs. Zemo mentions,
I'm a baron, Sam. My family was royalty until your friends destroyed my country.
Now this, of course, was his name in the comics, Baron Zemo. He's actually the 13th generation to rule over the lands in this castle. I love that they've adapted his more recent look from the comics, the trench coat and mask. A lot more menacing than the purple with the frilly shoulder pads. Although the trench coat does have the same fur as this costume in the comics, and of course the mask is comic accurate. They're meeting a woman called Selby, who could be based on Suzanne Selby, Starbrand from the comics. She worked for Roxxon before they moved their operation to Madripoor, so there's a loose connection there. There's lots of Marvel characters named Selby, but the one that most fits the description is your mom. When they were traveling on Zemo's jet, it occurred to me how inverted the world is now.
World's upside down. We need a new cap.
Instead of Tony and Rhodey on a jet, it's a supervillain. Instead of Captain America being a good, humble man, he's a jerkwad. The episode features heroes posing as villains, villains posing as heroes, and people with warped worldviews, like Carly Morgenthau, as symbolized by the broken mirror in this shot. Zemo finds Bucky's little book, and I love that he was like, "Stop looking at it, you guys, it's my personal private business, geez, seriously."
Gosh!
But then Sam confirmed a fan theory.
I've seen that book. It was Steve's when he came out of the ice.
Which is pretty touching. Steve gave this to Bucky to help him acclimate and have fun in this new era, but instead, Bucky has to use it to make amends. He has to erase the negative parts of his past before he can enjoy the good things about his present. They discuss Trouble Man.
I told him about Trouble Man. He wrote it in that book. Did you hear it? What'd you think?
I like 40s music, so...
You didn't like it?
The album that Sam recommended to Steve when they first met and played at the end of Winter Soldier.
On your left.
When Zemo says,
"You don't know what it's like to be locked in a cell." Oh, that's right, you do.
he's talking about Sam's time at the raft in Civil War. And, by the way, Trouble Man is about a hustler named T who's kind of a Robin Hood for his people, just like Karli Morgenthau. Sam says,
"What's up with Madripoor? You guys talk about it like it's Skull Island."
That's the prehistoric island where King Kong lives. The idea being that both islands are filled with monsters and you can never bring back anything good from it. Karli goes to a GRC outpost to visit Mama Danya, a woman who means a great deal to her. In the comics, Karl Morgenthau became the villain Flag Smasher after his father was killed, so I'm guessing that this woman raised Karli, and maybe she ran the orphanage where the other Flag Smashers grew up. The jewelry she's holding is a hamsa, a symbol used throughout the Middle East by Muslims, Christians, and Jews. It's sometimes called the Hand of Fatima, Muhammad's daughter, or the Hand of Mary, Miriam, or just the goddess, and it's a symbol of protection. But notice that instead of an eye at the center, it has the world. The image of the globe in a hand is also the logo of the Flag Smashers. So this one image tells you a lot about the organization's ideals. They include all religions, all people from all over the world to protect the planet. But as we'll see later on, that symbol has been usurped through terrorist actions. Madripoor is a fictional island from Marvel Comics where Wolverine goes to live under the name Patch and let off some steam killing gangsters. He even met Cap and Black Widow there during World War II. I laughed out loud when Sam said,
"If we have to do something about this, I'm the only one who looks like a pimp."
Because, in the comics, before he was the Falcon, he was a street hustler named Snap Wilson. It's always implied that he was a pimp, but never said outright. He's going under the alias Conrad Mack, aka the Smiling Tiger. That's an actual villain from the comics who's prominent in the underworld of Madripoor. When they enter the club, the song playing is a Filipino rap song called Amats by Shantido, which means my position. The lyrics go, "The strength of my position, so natural, no mixed chemicals." Appropriate, since they're looking for a strong man who provides strength with chemicals. Thanks to Conspiracy Victim on Twitter for that observation. The club is called the Princess Bar, a place Wolverine frequents in the comics, and thanks Jay Light for reminding me of that fact. There's also this graffiti, "The Power Broker is watching," a play on Big Brother is watching you from 1984. This is really setting up the Power Broker as the big bad of the series. In 1984, Big Brother watched people from inside TV screens. Bucky enters the club dressed as the Winter Soldier, and when he fights, we hear his theme again. But this time, it's also arranged alongside Zemo's theme.
Didn't take much for him to fall back into form.
It's a brilliant musical moment to show us that Zemo is in control of this situation. Also, our assistant manager Doug had an observation that he wanted to point out. What was it, Doug?
The Madripoor flag from the comics appears on the license plates.
Edgy Spidey on Twitter pointed out that if you Google this plate number alongside Marvel Comics, you get All New Wolverine issue 16. An issue that takes place in Madripoor. The club they end up in is called the Brass Monkey, which is from the Captain America comics. Back at Sharon Carter's place, we see her art collection.
You know, half the artwork in museums like the Louvre is fake. Little stuff sits in places like this.
Now, again, this goes back to the theme of the powerful keeping all the power for themselves and not sharing it with the people. So the main villain, the Power Broker, has a double meaning. He's dealing with superpowers, but also he controls the world's power. This painting is Woman with a Parasol by Claude Monet. The work is intended to be a private, informal portrait. Appropriate, since the work is now being used as part of a private, secret collection. Sharon Carter has become a lot more cynical these days.
You know the whole hero thing is a joke, right? I mean, the way you gave up that shield deep down, you must know it's all hypocrisy.
Now, her cynicism is a sign of the times. In Civil War, she was an upstanding person, modeled after her Aunt Peggy, who was Steve's moral guidepost.
Even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye, and say no. You move.
But now, just as the world is losing its faith in heroes following their failures, Sharon is feeling left behind. Finally, they find Wilfred Nagel. In the comics, Nagel is a true son of a bitch. In the series Truth, Red, White, and Black, he experiments on African-American soldiers against their will, trying to replicate Erskine's super soldier serum. This was based on the Pentagon's Tuskegee experiments, where they injected black men with syphilis just to see what would happen. In the comics, Nagel was the scientist who experimented on Isiah Bradley. That's the stable test subject that he mentions. And when he said says,
"Mine was going to be different. No clunky machines or jacked up bodies."
This could refer to the other African American test subjects like in the comics, or it could be a reference to the Red Skull or Bruce Banner, who was trying to replicate the super soldier serum with gamma radiation. Nagel also name drops Erskine from First Avenger.
"I did what no other scientist since Erskine was able to do."
When they get back in the car, Sam says,
"You're not gonna move your seat up, are you?"
No.
A callback to this.
Can you move your seat up? No.
Now this is interesting. Sharon says,
"We've got a big problem. Actually, a couple of them. I'll tell you in the car. Let's go."
There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, she's referring to Sam and Bucky as problems, which is implying that she has some other agenda that they're interfering with. And second, after a firefight, her nice car and employee are just waiting on her, implying that maybe the firefight was staged. These might have been goons that Sharon hired to create a ticking clock to get Sam and Bucky away from the situation. In the comics, Sharon was a villain, kind of. While she was under the mind control of Dr. Faustus, she assassinated Steve Rogers. Well, I mean, okay, she actually shot him full of time travel serum, but whatever. Now, the way that Carly describes the serum
Felt like my veins were on fire. Pray they'd kill me.
is very similar to what Steve experienced. Now this is showing us that not every villain is cut and dry evil. Everyone has a backstory and a motivation that leads them to arrive where they are. Remember what Steve said about another pair of villains, the Maximovs.
What kind of monster would let a German scientist experiment on them to protect their country?
Back to the theme of symbols, the Flag Smashers are able to unite around a common symbol, the world in an open palm. But Steve Rogers understood that a symbol is useless without the morality of the people trying to live up to what it represents. The Flag Smashers have a noble goal, a world without borders. But don't believe in their symbol, judge them by their actions. In this case, Carly becomes a terrorist and murders innocents, so the symbol that she uses is hypocritical. Steve Rogers refused to work for the government because the government could be corrupted.
My faith's in people, I guess.
He chose Sam to use the shield because he knew that Sam wasn't sure of himself. He knew that Sam would always try to live up to what the shield represented.
But that shield represents a lot of things to a lot of people, including me.
In the hands of Steve Rogers, it was a symbol of freedom. In the hands of Walker, it's a symbol of brutality. So in Latvia, Zemo guilt trips the fellas about not visiting the Sokovian Memorial.
Don't suppose any of you bothered visiting the memorial.
But he also says,
cannibalized by its neighbors before the land was even cleared of rubble.
Now what neighbors? Sokovia is an Eastern European nation, and so is Latveria. This is the homeland of Dr. Victor Von Doom.
But I am above all a reasonable man. Thus I have granted your leaders 1 week to surrender to the rule of Doom.
And Marvel did recently reacquire the film rights to Latveria and Doom when they bought Fox. So what if Doom is now the ruler of Latveria and he gains power by pillaging resources from Sokovia? Oh, but what resources, you ask? Isn't Sokovia just a giant crater? Well, remember, tons and tons of vibranium fell on the Sokovian crater, and vibranium is very hard to destroy. Doom could have acquired this vibranium to build his armor, weapons, Doombots, just use your imagination. And I'm not a guy who's always looking for Fantastic Four or mutant clues in these shows, but I really think this could be our first mention of Dr. Doom in the MCU.
Stop embarrassing yourself.
Finally, Bucky tracks the Wakanda Kimoyo beads to their source, Ayo, a member of the Dora Milaje that we met in Civil War and Black Panther.
Move, or you will be moved.
The Wakandans are pissed that Zemo is loose.
Episode 4 opens in Wakanda, pre-snap, set to the drums that were prevalent in the Black Panther score.
As Bucky's final trial by fire, get it, Ayo speaks the words that Hydra used to brainwash him. Now as she speaks, we see clips of Hydra's Siberian base in Civil War, his fight with Steve and Winter Soldier, the assassination of Howard and Maria Stark, fading into attacking Tony Stark, and ending with him finally recognizing Steve and the Winter Soldier, and the Winter Soldier score undercuts these flashbacks. Now this is showing that Wakanda was Bucky's rehab, or at least a place where he could mentally recuperate. This scene also shows the deep debt that Bucky owes to Wakanda and the Dora Milaje. Later, when Ayo deactivates his arm, this feels like a betrayal, because we've seen them free him from his programming, only to reveal that a part of him will always be programmed. In a subtle way, this scene was saying, what we give, we can take away. Afterwards, he cycles his arm back into action just like he did in Winter Soldier. Thanks, Buckknife Sabrosa, for that observation. Bucky mentions Shuri, while Ayo mentions King T'Chaka's death in Civil War. Then she lays down the three most important words, the words that the Flag Smashers are fighting to hear.
You're free.
The title of this episode is The Whole World is Watching, which has several meanings. It refers to the Wakandans monitoring Sam and Bucky, but also the way Carly is watching Sarah, America is watching Carly, and at the end of the episode, how the whole world is watching John Walker. Zemo's safe house is between a coffee shop and this place, which translates to Eastern Carpet Chemical Research Carpet Shop, meaning that he lives in the Coffee Carpet Research District. Nope, that's no place to buy a hammock.
It's the hammock complex down on 3rd?
Oh, the hammock district.
That's right.
Zemo's hideout has some interesting stained glass windows. Notice the hexagons. But also these bright red hexagrams. This symbol has been used by many Indian religions for centuries, but in Europe it's best recognized as the Star of David, a symbol of Judaism. This made me wonder if perhaps the Zemo family has Jewish heritage. This would be a far cry from Heinrich Zemo of the comics, who was a Nazi. This would also explain Zemo's aversion to supremacists and anyone who felt like they were above someone else. Zemo discusses the danger of supremacists, saying,
The desire to become a superhuman cannot be separated from supremacist ideals.
He also name-drops the Avengers and Ultron, but his larger point is that the people who seek power, who feel entitled to power, will always be corrupted by power. Erskine knew this too when he said,
The serum amplifies everything that is inside, so good becomes great, bad becomes worse.
And this is why Steve was chosen to begin with.
I don't want to kill anyone. I don't like bullies.
This is taking this mystical aspect of the serum and giving it a modern-day context. If a nation seeks military strength, it will be corrupted by it, just as we'll see later with John Walker. Sam finds a Flag Smasher hand that's the logo of the group. Last episode we learned that this symbol was taken from the Hamsa, a symbolic symbol used by many religions to ward off evil, in particular the evil eye. In this episode, the whole world is watching. That evil eye is government surveillance and cell phones that record John Walker at the end of the episode. Zemo recites the nursery rhyme, Ba Ba Black Sheep.
Ba ba black sheep, have you any wool?
This isn't a random choice. This rhyme originated in England during the wool tax in 1275. In the poem, the sheep says that he has 2 bags of wool for his master, but none for the freezing children in the alley. This is because the king was taxing wool, essentially taking it away from the people. This fits in neatly with Carly's goal of erasing nations and taxation and returning the world to an open, agrarian lifestyle. Then Zemo tempts the children with Turkish Delight, a disgusting candy that the White Witch used to tempt Edmund in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I mentioned this in the last video, but I love Zemo's costume design. The spotted fur of his trench coat speaks to the fuzzy shoulder pads of his classic comics costume, while the trench coat echoes the more recent look from the comics. I started to examine this graffiti behind Sharon, and then I looked up this tag, at Jizor, which turned out to be an Atlanta-based artist, and this is the Krog Street Tunnel in Atlanta, which is known for its ever-changing badass street art. I did look through some recent photos, and it looks like this piece was added just for this show. It's a reference to your mom. In the graveyard, Carly uncovers her stolen super soldier serum, which looks identical to the vials that created Steve Rogers. Once again, we get a mention of fighting Nazis, establishing that they are the one true universal evil that everyone agrees upon. The problem, as they illustrate in this scene, is that now the world is more complicated. The bad people don't always wear symbols to let you know that they're evil.
Have you noticed that our caps have actually got little pictures of skulls on them? Are we the baddies?
It turns out that Carly's actions have had the opposite effect of what she intended, and now the governments are about to clamp down and create stricter borders. Stricter borders usually leads to more enhanced nationalism, and as my Nemesis Heavy Spoilers pointed out, in the Sam Wilson Captain America comics, Flag Smasher says that nationalism will always lead to fascism, like when the Nazis rose to power in the 1930s. Technically, it's a robot decoy of Flag Smasher who says this, but no one's perfect, especially Heavy Spoilers.
But the world's more complicated now. People are lost. They need a leader who looks like them.
This whole conversation is laying the groundwork for Sam to be the Captain America for this new complicated world. Then he proposes that Carly could be a Captain America and goes on to say,
Today's heroes don't have the luxury of keeping their hands clean.
And this is exactly where we cross the line into the supremacists that Zemo is talking about. This is exactly what Walker believes. He has to be brutal to prevent the terrorists from winning. The show is framing Sam as the opposite of this point of view. In many ways, this show is about whether or not the idea of Captain America is outdated. If someone can wear the flag of America and still have it represent a good thing. Steve went through a similar transition when he came out of the ice.
Aren't the stars and stripes a little old-fashioned?
Later on, Sam proves that he's the kind of Captain America that they were talking about.
I agree with your fight. I just can't get with the way you're fighting it.
Remember, Steve also encountered superpower refugee terrorists, the Maximovs, and his first reaction was also to reason with them.
You can still walk away from this.
No, we will.
I know you've suffered.
Sam mentions,
I used to counsel soldiers dealing with trauma, okay? This is right in my wheelhouse.
which was his job in The Winter Soldier. Sam, Bucky, and Zemo are walking around Latvia carefully, trying to keep a low profile, while Walker just struts around in full uniform. There's a metaphor here for the way the US military flexes its muscles around the globe, sometimes taking out threats with missiles instead of precision. Or at least that's what I learned from watching Team America.
Don't worry, everything is boom. We stopped the terrorists.
And by the way, I like that Erin Kellyman is portraying a young leader of a group of outcasts struggling to survive, just like she did in Solo. Now, it turns out that Zemo had Carly pegged. She is a supremacist.
Thought we'd been chosen.
As soon as someone believes they're entitled to power because they're special or chosen, they are placing themselves above the rest of humanity. Every single MCU hero has one thing in common. They're all trying to prove that they're worthy of being a hero, whereas every villain believes that they are entitled to power, the universe owes it to them because they're special. This theme is prevalent in every MCU movie. Think about it. Now, Walker is the definition of a supremacist. He thinks that wearing the uniform entitles him to power.
Do you know who I am?
The Dora Milaje don't have jurisdiction here.
Just like in the comics, Battlestar is the voice of reason whispering in John's ear.
Wait, John. If you can talk her down, might be worth a try.
And when Sam communicates with Sharon, the secure connection looks an awful lot like the secure connection that Bruce Banner used to communicate with Samuel Stern. Now, this was a great fight, but I think Walker held his own against the Dora Milaje a lot longer than was realistic. The fight should have been over like this. Now, they end up pinning Walker down by using the shield against him, a way of signaling that he's not worthy or capable of wielding the shield or the title of Captain America. Afterwards, the Dora Milaje uses a frisbee kick to pick up the shield, just like Steve.
Now, in the last episode's breakdown, I mentioned the similarities between this series and Lord of the Rings, where the super soldier serum is the One Ring, and now John Walker is Boromir.
Now later, Battlestar says that he would take the serum without hesitation because...
God, imagine how many lives we could have saved that day if we had that serum.
Walker initially hesitated, worried about how the serum changes you. Like I said earlier, the serum only amplifies who you already are, just as giving a country a superpowered military would amplify the attitudes and nationalism that are already present in that country. After Walker secretly takes the serum, he busts through the door just like Steve Rogers did in his first full appearance as Captain America. But he's evil now. How can you tell? He's got scruff. Scruffy superheroes are bad. I learned that in Superman 3. During this last fight, we see that he's not so great with the shield, just like Walker had to train with it for weeks in the comics. It seems like the only thing Walker did practice was his superhero landing, and that's just like Steve in this scene. This could also be because he's not used to his new strength. Steve had a similar reaction right after he gained his powers. Now, Bucky does that cool knife spin from the Winter Soldier. Walker hating knives.
What's with all the knives?
Could be a subtle nod to Howard Stark's statement in the first Avenger.
I'm just not going to attack you with a pocket knife.
I see you've played knifey spoony before.
And then Carly kills Battlestar. Oof. Walker goes off the deep end, just like in the comics, where he went on a revenge murder spree after his parents were killed. Now, when he finally murders this guy in the square, there's a lot to unpack. One, a shield, especially a round shield like this, is by definition a defensive weapon. Walker using it as a piercing weapon is a distortion of its original purpose, just like he's distorting the original title of Captain America. And there's a lot of symbolism here for the use of American military around the world, but also the agency of S.H.I.E.L.D. itself. After S.H.I.E.L.D. became corrupted by Hydra, they went on the offensive with Project Insight.
We're going to neutralize a lot of threats before they even happen.
And then there's the parallel with Steve Rogers' fight with Tony in Civil War. He held back from using the shield to kill Tony. But even then, immediately afterwards, he realized he was no longer worthy of the shield after using it in anger. Twitter user Alonso GD also pointed out this parallel with John Walker using the shield in Omega Flight number 4. Yes, the classic issue of the beloved series Omega Flight. Also in the comics, Hoskins was originally the new Bucky. So, in a way, Walker lost a Bucky sidekick, just like Steve did. Twitter user Estonian Raider had some great observations about this final scene. This wasn't filmed in Latvia, this is in Prague in the Czech Republic. Now, this is actually a statue of Josef Youngman, who invented the modern Czech language.
But the base of the statue was altered to include the words of the Latvian national anthem.
God bless Latvia. Another way for the show to subtly show that nationalism can be violent and dangerous. No offense to the Latvian people. And this background sign was altered to read Golden Horse in Latvian. That's a famous play that celebrates the culture and nationalism of Latvia, centering on the struggles between light and darkness. That's a great catch, man. I mean, I'm assuming you're not lying because I don't speak Lettish, so thank you for that. The scene is also a metaphor for cell phones filming police brutality. In this case, an authority figure in a uniform letting his emotions get the best of him and killing a helpless captive. Heavy spoilers pointed out that the flag on Walker's shoulder pad is in black and white. Now traditionally this means no quarter given or no prisoners will be taken, a symbol of Walker's aggressive nature. But now it's common to see this symbol with the blue stripe in the middle representing the thin blue line. People have used this to show support of police departments in response to the Black Lives Matter protests. When you think about it, this is a very subtle, poignant use of symbols. Also, the symbolism is on point here. The guy who just said he used to be a fan of Captain America until the world became warped.
When I was a kid, I was actually a Captain America fan.
Got beaten to death by a warped version of Captain America. It's crazy that this scene is on Disney Plus, right? Christine Nichols on Twitter pointed out that this statue in the credits is the Latvian Freedom Monument, placed just after the Statue of Liberty. Now in real life, this statue survived Soviet occupation and has a strong meaning for the Latvian people. This shows that the concept of liberty transcends borders, much like the Flag Smashers' agenda. Aaron Varola on Twitter, a friend of the show, pointed out that Florence Kasumba's name appears in Wakandan in the credits. Now, after these events, I'm thinking that Sam won't have to take the shield. The government will give it to him so they can present a more stable view of Captain America. This is what happens in the comics after Walker comes unglued. Personally, I love the character of John Walker. I think he's great because we all love to hate him, and I kind of wish that he had his own movie to develop his rise and fall. There are several issues of the comic where he's made Captain America, and Steve is nowhere to be found. And now, for no reason, a Zemo dance party.
Now, episode 5 is titled Truth, and this has several meanings.
It's the name of the comic series about Isiah Bradley as the first black Captain America, but also consider the way that the characters in this episode grapple with different truths. John Walker can't bear to face the truth that he messed up and was a bad Captain America. He lies to Lamar's family, telling them that he killed the man responsible for his death.
I went after him.
He's the one that killed our boy?
Yes.
Bucky has also been running away from the truth, that his life of the Winter Soldier is actually behind him and he now needs to look forward.
I've been making amends. You weren't amending, you were avenging.
But most importantly, there's the truth of what actually happened to Isiah Bradley.
They erased me.
The episode shows that truth can depend largely on your own point of view. What's true for Sam isn't necessarily the truth that Carly and the Flag Smashers live every day.
How many times do we have to pay with our lives just to be citizens of this goddamn planet?
But the show isn't saying that truth is in the eye of the beholder. Steve Rogers believed in unyielding principles. Right was right and truth was truth. Something either is true or it isn't, no matter if people choose to believe in it. John Walker killed a man in cold blood, even though he thinks it was justified. Now, this idea that Steve represents pure truth was symbolized by Bucky and Sam's Frisbee session. As they chuck discs between them, they're revealing their personal truths about themselves.
It's just that shield's closest thing I've got left to a family.
It's almost like Steve is there with them, acting as a therapist. I was a little surprised that John Walker was running away at the start of the episode. I thought he would have been proud of what he'd done to this fugitive. Or maybe he was running away from Bucky and Sam. When he's alone, he hears Lamar's voice talking to him.
The suit comes with expectations, bro.
Now this is similar to the comics, where, years after his parents were murdered, he still talks to them like they're alive. When Walker's alone, you can hear this eerie drone, like the Winter Soldier's theme. It's like the show is saying that Walker is on the same path, to being a tool who kills without morality. And what a kick-ass fight, with plenty of Easter eggs and callbacks. I like that at first, Walker fights close quarters, refusing to let go of the shield, instead preferring to use it as a blunt object. And when Bucky catches the shield, it's nearly a beat-for-beat recreation of his fight with Steve in the Winter Soldier. Now, this dynamic is also the reverse of the final fight in Captain America Civil War, where Bucky and Captain America fought a non-powered hero with tech. The shield drop at the end is also a callback to Civil War, except now it's Sam taking the title instead of Steve laying it down. Walker sandwich! This fight is also loosely adapted from the comics, where Steve Rogers had to fight Walker to get him to lay down the shield. And how about this moment where Sam tries to wipe away the blood? He feels responsible for what happened because he's the one who gave up the shield in the first place.
It belongs in a museum.
The government swoops in to take control and give the character some downtime. Sam leaves the wings with Joaquin Torres.
You forgot the wings.
Keep 'em.
Now remember, in the comics, Torres becomes the new Falcon, so I'm betting he'll use his science abilities we saw in episode 1 to fix the wings and become Cap's new sidekick. Walker is brought before a panel to answer for his crimes, just like he did in the comics after going on a murder spree. Now I actually thought this scene was heartbreaking. The show has done a great job of speaking to veterans' issues, like PTSD and lack of financial aid. And here we see what a lot of vets faced after coming home. The government turned them into killers and then rejected them.
I only ever did what you asked of me, what you told me to be and trained me to do, and I did it.
It wasn't my war. You asked me, I didn't ask you. And I did what I had to do to win.
During this scene, you can also hear this haunting, sad theme from Civil War.
It is the order of this council that you...
And then, Julia Louis-Dreyfus shows up as Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, basically playing Selena Meyer in the MCU.
Really, Amy? Because I've met some people, okay? Real people. And I gotta tell you, a lot of them are idiots.
This is a huge surprise, not just because of the actor, but the character that she's playing. Valentina goes all the way back to the early Nick Fury comics by Jim Steranko. She was a top S.H.I.E.L.D. agent and Nick Fury's lover, but years later she joined Hydra and took on the name Madam Hydra. Also, introducing an ex-S.H.I.E.L.D. agent turned rogue might be a way of foreshadowing that Sharon Carter is evil now. Now this scene is also very true to real life. Many vets have a hard time adjusting to their old lives back home, so they take jobs with private contracting companies like Halliburton and become members of private militaries overseas. Now I did think it was a little bold of Carly to return to her hideout, but their operation runs really deep. I'm sure she had people on the inside telling her that it was clear.
Why don't you put on your running shoes and get to the point?
Next we go to Zemo at the Sokovian Memorial. Now I love the detail of the Sokovian flag here, which we've only ever seen in the background in Age of Ultron. That's nice production design, team. When the scene opens, there's another musical callback, Zemo's theme from Civil War. And part of the reason there's so many of these musical motifs and callbacks to past MCU films is because Henry Jackman composed The Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, and this show. I also thought it was a nice touch that the statue isn't of a brave Sokovian soldier, it's a family, to show they didn't just lose lives, they lost a home. This is also subtly reminding us of the Maximoffs and Baron Zemo's family. And the text at the bottom is a touching tribute to your mom. Notice the memorial is on the lip of a large crater created by Ultron, now filled with rainwater. After Bucky proves, once again, that he's not a killing machine, Zemo is arrested by the Dora Milaje. Now notice they are traveling in the Royer Talon fighter that we first saw in Black Panther, or as this kid calls it,
that's like a Bugatti spaceship.
Ao says,
we will take him to the raft.
Now this is the prison for superpowered people that we first saw in Captain America Civil War, but also this moment, this one line could have huge implications for the future of the MCU. Last we saw, the raft was supervised by General Thunderbolt Ross. For a while now, we've speculated that he might create his own team of ex-criminals, the Thunderbolts, named after him, Thunderbolt Ross. And in the comics, the Thunderbolts were originally led by Baron Zemo. Ao also reminds us that Bucky is nicknamed
White Wolf,
who is the head of Wakandan secret police in the comics. Now I think it's funny they still call him this, because this is just a nickname given to him by some kids. It would be like if John Walker's superhero name was Captain Squishy Face. Sam goes to Baltimore,
If you walk through the garden,
where he runs into Isaiah's nephew, Elijah. Now, in the comics, Elijah becomes the hero patriot and leads the Young Avengers. Sam's talk with Isaiah is the crux of the episode. Like Walker, the old man is another soldier who is abandoned by his government. But most importantly, Isaiah is able to articulate all the doubts that Sam is feeling.
No self-respecting black man would ever want to be.
Later on, Bucky says,
When Steve told me what he was planning, I don't think either of us really understood what it felt like for the black man to be handed the shield.
And I never thought about it either. I mean, I think most white people wouldn't.
Well, I don't look at the world through that lens.
But like a lot of minorities, Sam can't simply separate his race from the equation, because that's what some people will always see first. In this line,
they will never let a black man be Captain America,
is actually what happens in the comics when a black person on the selection committee says that America isn't ready for a black Captain America. Now, I know that some of you down in the comments are going to be like, well, why does the show have to be political and about racism? Well, it's political because this is what Captain America looks like. He wears the flag. And he's always been about fighting racism. This is his first appearance in the comics, punching history's greatest racist monster, a year before America even entered World War II. Also, this is all in keeping with the comics. When Sam became Captain America, he decided he wasn't going to keep his political opinions to himself, and there was significant public blowback. Isaiah mentions,
I saw men in the red tails The famous 332.
Which was the nickname of the Tuskegee Airmen, an all-black fighter squadron in World War II. But also in World War II, the Army injected black soldiers with syphilis and didn't tell them. These experiences served as the inspiration for Isiah's story.
They tell us it's tetanus.
Just like in the comics, Isiah was part of an involuntary experiment with several other black soldiers. He was also arrested and jailed in the comic, essentially for disobeying orders. And, also in the comic, his wife never believed the lie that he was dead. Like Steve Rogers, she held on to an unwavering truth. Isiah is mourning the loss of his history.
They erase me, my history, but they've been doing that for 500 years.
This spooky thing called slavery happened, and my entire ethnic identity was erased.
So this all gives Sam a lot to think about. Can he become a symbol of America? Should he become a symbol of America? I mean, it's not very subtle that his nephews keep calling him Uncle Sam. He's also facing the erasure of his own personal history, selling his family's boat and home. But the Wilsons get their George Bailey moment as the community pitches in to help. My favorite line of the episode was Bucky talking about his metal arm.
Well, I don't always think of it immediately. I'm right-handed.
Now this is funny, but it's also saying that the machine part of Bucky, the Winter Soldier part, isn't dominant. He still thinks of himself as a man first. And then the show takes a break for a feel-good montage. So here's a question for you. What the hell is Sharon up to? In this episode, we hear her hire Batroc the Leaper.
Oh, please, if it weren't for me, you'd still be rotting away in that Algerian prison.
And not only that, but she says,
I can give you double this time.
Implying that she was the one who hired him for his job in the first episode to kidnap the American commander. But at the end of this episode, we see that she's actually hired Batroc to work for the Flag Smashers. Let's face it, she's probably just going to end up being the power broker.
Which I admit is both bogus and sad.
Now there may be a clue in the artwork that opens this scene. This is called The Raft of Medusa by Theodore G. This actually has nothing to do with the Greek myth of Medusa. Instead, it depicts the real-life shipwreck of a French ship called the Medusa. 147 survivors scrambled onto a raft. In 13 days, 132 people died, and the survivors had to eat the dead. Symbolically, this is the situation that Sharon finds herself in. She was a member of the government who's now been abandoned, and she's forced to cannibalize the people around her to survive. It's also not an accident that the shot focuses on the slave at the center of the painting, the only black man in the work. Now in real life, this was a military ship en route to Africa to reinforce the slave colony of Senegal. As a result, this became a famous painting among abolitionists, a way of showing that God punished the sailors for the sin of slavery. Back at Sam's, we see that Bucky is wearing dog tags, which is interesting. His tags weren't actually recovered from the train accident. Presumably, Hydra had them afterwards, but probably didn't keep them. I checked, and there is no provision in the US military for reissuing dog tags. This leads me to believe that Bucky is actually wearing the dog tags of his friend Steve Rogers as a tribute. Hey, you know this line?
Steve is gone.
Is he? Or is he just old now? The museum exhibit in episode 1 didn't specify, it just said that he went off to live his life. I think the undertone here is that Chris Evans is gone and not Steve Rogers. Now notice that in civilian life, Bucky always wears blue, the color that his character wore in the comics. And I loved when it took Sam, a veterans counselor, to help Bucky understand what it means to be a hero. Helping people isn't about kicking ass or avenging. You need to
be of service.
And you know, it never occurred to me how terrifying it would be to have this shield thrown right at you. It's a fitting symbol for Sam. He has to learn to embrace the shield's legacy, no matter how scary. Sam tells his nephews,
all day, man.
A reference to Steve's favorite catchphrase.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.
Thanks Mal Fury and Rage for pointing that one out. The GRC's meeting is being broadcast on WHIH, the MCU's in-universe news network that we've seen on WandaVision and various social media. The GRC meeting seems designed after the War Room in Doctor Strangelove.
You can't fight in here, this is the War Room!
Now, I don't want to spoil this movie for you, it's my second favorite movie of all time, but basically, both the GRC and Doctor Strangelove feature a very small group who are determining the fate of the entire world. Friend of the show, Kevin Hamilton, pointed out that the Patch Act the GRC is about to pass could be named after Wolverine's pseudonym that he uses while in Madripoor. When the Flag Smashers took control, the code words and the spy elements seemed like they learned from Hydra.
One world, one people.
Again, lending to the theory that they are being manipulated by the power broker. And we have a brief mid-credit scene of John Walker, fully healed, thanks to the super soldier serum, making his own shield. Notice he's embedding it with the Medals of Honor, a way of ironically using the accolades they gave him to claim authority.
But also, the hammering and man cave feel calls back to Tony Stark building his Mark I armor.
The show keeps emphasizing how the world is upside down now. Things that were good have become inverted and evil. Case in point, now the Tony Stark origin story is being used to create a villain instead of a hero.
The final episode begins with the GRC under siege and Sharon Carter wearing an electronic face mask.
We first saw this used by Black Widow and Winter Soldier, but they became a major story device on the show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The title of the episode is One World, One People, which of course is the motto of the Flag Smashers.
For we are, after all, simply one world and one people.
All season long, we've been watching the show and thinking, well, their goal seems noble, a world without borders. But as Sam points out, that's not their goal, it's their means.
What if I'm making the world a better place?
It's not a better place if you're killing people, it's just different.
And the episode ends with Sam accomplishing Carly's goal through mediation.
Look, you people have just as much power as an insane god or a misguided teenager. The question you have to ask yourself is, how are you going to use it?
So now let's talk about that suit because it is awesome. I love how it combines aspects of several of the other Cap suits. The combat fatigues pants from the World War II suit, the bright stripes harken back to a suit in the Avengers, and the stars and stripes in the center are modeled after his Winter Soldier suit. And actually that suit was very similar to the one that Steve wore in the comics while Sam was Captain America. This is also fitting because the first villain we saw Steve fight in that suit was Batroc the Leaper, the first villain that Sam fights as the new Cap. And Sam's whole costume is modeled very closely after his suit from the comics, and it's great. And also, Sam's new wings deflect a whole frickin' helicopter, which tells me that like T'Challa, Shuri must have made him a suit of vibranium. This line,
I thought Captain America was on the moon,
is a callback to episode 1.
Some people, they think that he's in the secret base on the moon.
Bucky says,
You don't think I ever fought for something bigger than myself? That's all I ever tried to do, and I failed twice.
He's referencing World War II and the Infinity War. I never really thought about that. He's 0-2 on world saving. Walker shows up with this adorable little super special shield that he made all by himself. Now notice that he welded his medals of honor to the back of the shield so he could always look at them. You could see this as a reminder of the country that turned its back on him because he's so full of hate. But I think it's actually his way of reminding himself of why he is doing this. Remember why he got the medal to begin with.
3 badges of excellence to make sure I never forget the worst day of my life.
And the reason he took the serum.
God, imagine how many lives we could have saved that day if we had that serum.
Now, I'd have to go back and check the records, but I think this is the first time that Bucky gets to help people instead of just hurting them. He's following Sam's advice.
But you got to make them feel better. You got to go to them and be of service.
Now, at some moments when Walker seems like he's on the edge of a breakdown, there's an eerie drone in the score, which sounds like the beginning of the Winter Soldier theme. Like Walker is on a dark path that leads into becoming a pure killing machine. Walker running into the battle in a rage is pretty much his origin story in the comics. As the hero Patriot, he was a media celebrity, just like his early days as Cap. Then, after becoming Cap, his parents were murdered, sending him off on a murder spree, which causes the government to take away his shield. He says,
You don't think Lamar's life mattered?
A nod to the Black Lives Matter movement. In the comics, Walker is not a full-on villain. He's more of an anti-hero, and he's kind of settled into that role here. He has to choose between saving people and revenge, and he chooses to help. When this happens, his theme, earlier presented in a minor key, is switched to a major key, symbolizing him embracing the new hero role. This line is a callback to episode 2. This is also what Sam is facing in his new role as Captain America. Like many other people of color, society sees his race first and not the man. His struggle is to now be accepted as Captain America, not simply the black Captain America. Then we get the reveal that Sharon is the power broker,
Which I admit is both bogus and sad.
because it was obvious. It's the twist that everybody guessed that should have been to throw us off the trail of robot body Arnim Zola. But whatever, big twist. Let me know what you thought down in the comments or at me on Twitter. Now, I love how Sam is immediately able to integrate the shield with his fighting style to compensate for his lack of powers, like using his wings as a brace. And hey, all those montage flips paid off. Bucky and Walker are able to intercept the Flag Smashers by using the app on the phone that Carly gave Bucky to begin with, so she could monologue at him.
Not a great plan.
Social media is toxic, y'all. Read a book. During Sam and Carly's final battle, at one point, both the shield and a gun are dropped. Now, Carly has a moment where she could choose which one to grab, and she chooses the gun. This is actually her whole character in one scene. She's an inspirational character with noble goals. In another life, she could have been Captain America.
I didn't think there could be another Captain America until I met you.
But instead, She chose violence. Now, it's hard to see, but when she dies, she's holding a hamsa with the world in the middle. This belonged to Mama Danya. And by the way, a guy emailed me and said that her name, Danya Madani, has a hidden meaning. Danya means world in Persian, and Madani means citizen in Arabic, so Danya Madani means global citizen. And the guy who emailed me was named Jack Human, which is definitely the name an alien would call himself if he wanted to email me Falcon and the Winter Soldier Easter eggs from space. So thanks for the tip, Jack Human, but I shan't be giving you access to any nuclear codes. This symbol is actually a hamsa, a symbol that holds religious significance for Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Like the Flag Smashers, it transcends borders and cultural identity and serves as the inspiration for their logo. Now, Sam, in the end, achieves Carly's goal peacefully. During his final monologue, he says, "Thug." And this word is often used in right-wing media to describe black men, especially black athletes. Now, I like that Sam's big coming out as Captain America ends with him mediating, like we first saw him do in Winter Soldier. The show has been building to this all season long.
People are lost. They need a leader who looks like them.
Sam's greatest gift here isn't flight or the shield, it's his empathy. His ultimate point is that you have to let marginalized people in the room where it happens. The room where it happened, the room where it happened. Now, during his speech, he references Thanos and the events of Infinity War.
And face a force so powerful it could erase half the planet. Few people have just as much power as an insane god.
And he's right. World events like this should unite the world, not divide it. Also, way to fend off the trolls.
Every time I pick this thing up, I know there are millions of people out there who are going to hate me for it.
Political stance is exactly what he does in the comics after becoming Cap. Isiah is watching on WHIH, the in-universe news channel that was first seen creating social media tie-ins for the movie Ant-Man. Also watching is Joaquin while he's repairing the wings. This is foreshadowing that he'll become the new Falcon, just like in the comics. The remaining super soldiers are killed by Zemo's butler, while he rests comfortably in the Raft, the prison for superfolk that we first saw in Civil War. Now next we see Val in the Senate Hall. Last night I pointed out that this character in the comics starts off as a femme fatale foil for Fury, but later becomes the villain Madam Hydra. Now here, it seems like she's working for some black ops branch of the government, as symbolized by her card.
There's nothing on it.
My theory is she's working with Thunderbolt Ross to assemble a Black Ops Avengers team made up mostly of villains.
Similar to the Thunderbolts, the Dark Avengers, and the Secret Warriors.
David Gallagher on Twitter pointed out to me that calling her Val seems to be making her an amalgam with Val Cooper, who worked with U.S. Agent, who worked with Walker for years as part of the Commission on Superhuman Affairs. Walker's black suit and lame name,
a U.S. agent,
are straight from the comics. It's an appropriate color choice since he only sees the world in black and white with none of Sam's nuance. Walker's last line,
Back! Back!
is the same as his return in the comics in Captain America 354. Thanks David Gallagher for that one. When Bucky tells the old man about his son, his coat is Bucky blue, the same color his character wore in the comics, symbolizing his journey coming full circle as he finally puts the life of the Winter Soldier behind him. And he pulls a Goodwill Hunting, leaving a note for his therapist instead of actually finishing therapy. Kinda crappy. Steve left some really good pop culture in that book for him.
Internet, so helpful.
So let's go through a few of these names, most of which we saw in Episode 1. Andrei Rostov in the comics is the Soviet villain the Red Guardian, and he was Bucky's warden when the Russians imprisoned him in a gulag. This is when Bucky was making amends in the comics, just like he's doing now in the MCU. P.W. Hauser was the actor who starred alongside Sebastian Stan in I, Tonya. H. Zemos for Helmut Zemo. And Kuznetsov was a Soviet scientist who invented a robot called Udarnik. There's also S. Whitaker for legendary comics inker Steve Whitaker. C. Collins is a reference to your mom, and the name Hudson here could be a reference to James Hudson, leader of the Canadian super team Alpha Flight.
Even if she is married, it's a Canadian marriage. It's like their money or their army. Nobody takes it seriously.
Back at Isaiah's house, he references,
"You ain't no Malcolm, Martin, Mandela."
The prominent civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Nelson Mandela. When Sam gives his speech, Isaiah's grandson Elijah is hovering in the background, listening. Now in the comics, Elijah becomes the hero patriot and leads the Young Avengers, something they're clearly leading up to in the MCU. Now when they go through the exhibit, we saw a little more of it than we did in the premiere. This shot is from the newsreel where Steve looks at his Peggy Carter compass. The Shatter Day is also new to symbolize the Avengers breaking up.
Broke up? Like a band? Like the Beatles?
This is also very similar to the marketing logo that Marvel used during Endgame. This scene really got to me. Old men crying, I just can't take it. It parallels the ending of Isaiah's story in The Truth, Red, White, and Black, when Steve Rogers finally meets Isiah and sees that he's been honored secretly in the black community for years. This overhead shot of black soldiers is a vintage photograph from World War II that served as an inspiration for this panel from Truth, Red, White, and Black. The plaque reads that the soldiers were experimented on against their will and the government covered it up. Now, this not only means that Isiah is in the history books, but he doesn't have to worry about the government keeping him quiet anymore. And of course, the series is rebranded with a new title at the end. The post-credits scene is Sharon being pardoned and going back to work at the CIA so she can sell state secrets. I really hope she's like a Skrull or something, because otherwise, this was a very obvious choice, but it is a fun place to take her character. The senator says,
"The Carter name has always been synonymous with service."
A reference to Peggy Carter's work in the war and as a founder of S.H.I.E.L.D. I do like that now that the world is upside down, good is bad, and Carter is evil. All of this seems like a setup for the Dark Avengers in the comics when Norman Osborn disguised villains as heroes. Now, who do you think Sharon was on the phone with? Is she rebuilding Hydra, or just kind of doing her own thing?
My guess is we'll see her again in the show Armor Wars.
These comics were about Tony Stark fighting to make sure his technology didn't fall into the hands of his enemies. Overall, I like the series a lot, but I think it would have benefited from a few more episodes. All the various plot threads could have been explored a little deeper. Walker seems like he snapped immediately and didn't get much build-up, but mostly, there was a lot of tell and not show. We don't ever see refugees being marched around by troops, we just hear about it. We don't see people starving, we just hear about it.
I get the feeling that the pandemic might have affected some of this, and there were rumors about a whole storyline involving a plague that got cut because it was too similar to what was going on in real life at the time. But overall, it was a great show full of action and character development, which has been rare amongst the haystack of Marvel Disney Plus shows since Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So guys, be sure to join us in our Discord server where all the fun happens, and be sure to let us know your thoughts on Falcon and the Winter Soldier down in the comments below, or you can also stay tuned for our Captain America Brave New World coverage coming soon. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.